United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do.
President Trump addressing the United Nations General Assembly earlier this week in New York, his speech, described by many on the right as historic, his speech described by members of the press, fill in the blank as to their political philosophy, but members of the press were less than enthusiastic. Take a look at this dialogue, and we featured it the other day. It is George Stephanopoulos, the one-time Democrat Party operative, a one-time aide to Bill Clinton, talking to Terry Moran, now the ABC News correspondent based in London. A very interesting conversation they had in ABC News coverage of the president's speech at the UN. Let's look and listen.
If you read the president's words, he said the conditions for totally destroying North Korea would be a force to defend ourselves and our allies. You could read that possibly to even open up a justification for preventive war against North Korea.
That is a potential justification, but the words totally destroying a nation of 25 million people, that borders on the threat of committing a war crime.
Now, wow, let's just stop and think about this. The president, in an incredibly public setting, arguably the most public of settings, reaffirms our sovereignty, describes the threat, and with the greatest sincerity says, if that regime takes action, the United States will take action as well. Now, there is a place for analysis, but what always interests me is that the elites give to the Alphabet Network some sort of super status that, well, they're professionals and they are above subjectivity. Oh, really? You just had Terry Moran, despite the president doing this publicly, dealing with a threat, reinforcing the notion of sovereignty and security. There is Terry Moran saying, oh, he could be considered edging up to the status of committing a war crime. Curious interaction. And our next guest says, when it comes to the relationship between institutions of the presidency and the press, it is the news media suffering from what she calls confirmation bias. Here to explain all that to us, relationship expert Jill Payne, Skyping in from Houston. Jill, it's good to have you. We thank you for your patience. Explain to me confirmation bias.
Okay, first of all, JD, just to make everyone feel wonderful, because I am a therapist, that right here is a list of all the biases that we people have. And what that is, it's a tendency to know what you think may be right from past experience and so forth. So our biases work for us because if we have a preference for food instead of eating a book, see, that's healthy. But what happens is a lot of times our preferences are a little skewed. And so it gets a tunnel vision. And so what we do is we see something, and if we're not liking that person, then everything about that person, we only focus on the negative. And it's tunnel vision. So we block out all that other good stuff that that person may say. So for instance, in his speech, in Trump's speech, when he said, America comes first, right away, not only did he lift his voice and speak louder and point his finger and do his okay, saying how everyone else, all the other leaders need to do the same thing, no one heard that. They only heard America first. That's an example of
interesting. So it becomes fill in the blank. It's almost as if, I guess another term for it, and excuse me, and an elegant, uneducated term is the confirmation bias. It becomes an assumption. It's a fulfilling prophecy. It has to be this way. We hear this to the exclusion of everything else. Because you're right, it was not only sovereignty for the United States, it was sovereignty, the president said, of every world leader assembled. I put my nation first. I trust you will do the same for your nation. Let me ask you, Jill, is it fair to say that we can gauge relationships among institutions the same way we can gauge interpersonal relationships?
Yes, everything is relational. I've said that before. And I wanted to say something on how come all this is happening. I want to do the quote from you this morning. You said, Trump redefines the presidency. And there's something called schematas or schemes. And what that is, just real quick, Piaget thought about it, and it's. I want you to think of it as those little index cards that you write on, and so they're just little information that we gather. So let's say that you see a little kitty cat and you're little, and you think, oh, kitty cats are fluffy, they're sweet, they give licks, they're just adorable, and then all of a sudden you meet another kitty cat and it scratches you. You just go in disarray, and you have this cognitive disequilibrium. And so what happens is your schema is not matching what your mental process is. And so people are not, a president schemata, what do we think of as a president? We don't think of Trump. What kind of person do we think?
Well, in the past, we have thought about those who are articulate, those who are compassionate, those who imbue on their broad shoulders the ability to deal with problems. But first and foremost, for the last half century, I would say understanding, empathetic, wise, and well-spoken, if not necessarily soft-spoken.
So what's happening here is we've got this New Yorker that's a businessman. He's blunt. He's to the point. He says, this is what we need to do. This is how we need to do it. He speaks in layman's terms, easy to understand, and let's do it now. And so people, when you have this disequilibrium, it causes fear, it causes anxiety, it causes depression, and that's what's happening with the quote other side and even the never Trumpers. And so their schematas aren't matching, and so then they go for this conformative bias, and this is what's happening.
Well, it's interesting, you know, Jill. We may have to borrow, I forget the piece of literature, but maybe there's a title we need to use for this segment. Jill Explains It All, because it does come down to relationships and the recognition of different things within our field of vision, within our field of emotion and experience. Let me give you 30 seconds for the final word. What is next in this? Will the American people, you know, from time to time, it's like with a checkbook, when you have to change the year. When the president changes, it takes a while to go to say the president like that in terms of a pronoun and associate it with the person who has the job. Will people adjust to the Trump style, or will there remain this animus? I'm sad to say only about 30 seconds remains for your analysis, Jill.
Real quick. Donald Trump seems to have a positive with the world, not so much the United States. So, and I think he knows that. So he is emphasizing, even speaking to the UN, they seem to listen to him. And the more that they come together, that will be peer pressure for other people to go along with Trump. There's going to be that 10% that are not going to go along with him. I do believe in time. I think people are going to see that he is just bringing along a lot of positiveness.
Well, good. And speaking of time, our time is up. Jill Payne, via Skype from Houston. Jill, as always, we appreciate your acute analysis. I'll be back with more after this.